There we are. Awesome. All right. Welcome, everyone. I'm Paige. I'm an alcoholic. And what we're going to be diving into this week is the third step. And so, we're going to kick it off on page 58, 59, and we're going to bounce a little bit. And kind of like last week, it'll be more of a sequential bounce. We're not going to line by line as I love to do, but we will be talking about and breaking down and exploring the third step. So if you peruse your eyeballs. That's the weirdest sentence I've said in this big book study so far. There's room for weirder. Let's pop over, just have a gander, have a look at step 3 as it's written on page 59. So step 3, as it's written on page 59, it says, made a decision to turn our will and our lives over to the care of God as we understood him. So what we're going to do is we're going to break down the third step and then have a look at what is the decision we're making? Why would I make it and how do I make it? So made a decision. What I want to emphasize is the third step is very simply a decision. I won't say just because it's a big one. And I always like to make the joke. Those of you who, when we were in your first year, ever hear that hey, don't make any major decisions in your first year? Have you seen that third step? That's a big one. And we definitely want to make that before we hit that year. I want to make that quickly. But the thrust of what the third step is simply a decision. So there's not this action that's happening in the third step. In fact, spoilers, the third step is a decision to take action. So made a decision, and then it says to turn our will and our lives over to the care of God as we understood him. So the decision is to turn our will and our lives over to the care of God. How the heck do we do that, right? So my will and my life, it is not going to get turned over in step 3. How does my will and my life get turned over to the care of this higher power? Well, that happens in steps 4 through 9. And I continue that process of turning it over or leaving it in the care of a higher power. I continue that process in 10, 11, and 12. So ultimately, what is the third step? The third step is simply a decision that I am going to work these 12 steps out of this book as a way of life, like my life depends on it, because it does. That's what I'm deciding. And you might be like, I'm deciding what now? All we are deciding is I am deciding that I'm going to work these steps. I'm going to give these 12 steps my best go. I'm going to give them my best effort. That is simply what the decision is. And then I want to talk about what is my will, what is my life. And so a lot of times in the rooms, we'll hear that my will is my thoughts and my life is my actions. And I'm not saying that's wrong. And if that rocks and rolls for you, if that jives for you, amazing. If you're liking that, wonderful. But, and I got this from a sponsee, which I always think it's the coolest thing. When you, the most, profound spiritual things, they always come from sponsees. You know what I mean? And if you don't, hey, get into action. Start working with people. Absolutely. But one of my sponsees mentioned that what if my will was my actions and my life was the results? And I know you guys wake up every morning and what happens between your ears is healthy and happy, joyous, and free, and you're just living your best life in your noodle. But for this silly little drunk, that is not my baseline. In fact, I need the power that animates the universe for me to not wake up suicidal. That's just how my little brain works. And so I don't have direct control over the first thought that comes into my mind. And actually, as you guys probably know, based on my inability to stay on track, not go on a tangent, you know what I mean? I don't have control over the first thought. But here's what I do have control over. I have control over the course of action that I take. I have control over the inventory that I write, the prayers that I say, the meditation that I do, the fifth step that I share with God and another human being. I have control over the quiet hour, the willingness for things to be removed, to ask, to make amends, to continue that process, to work with others. I have control over that. And you know what is my lived experience? I lean into that, and then my thoughts change. And it's kind of annoying, and I apologize for those that were at my earlier Big Book study. I'm going to tell the same story. And if you're not bored of it, I am, so that's fine. But like for most of my life, and I'm talking like kindergarten, I would wake up, and who would wake up before me was the little gremlins in my mind, the little like suicidal ideation gremlins, the little like, you shouldn't be here anymore, you suck, you're a piece of garbage, and more expletives that I'm not going to use because I'm watching my profanity. But they weren't, and that's how I would wake up every morning. And it would just be going. And when that was happening, those thoughts would happen, and they were real. What I mean by that is I would think I am the biggest piece of garbage, and I would be like, you know what? I am the biggest piece of garbage. I shouldn't be here anymore. You know what? That's right. I shouldn't be here anymore. And then what happened is I began to lean into this work, to these 12 steps, to really dive in. And what began to happen was I would have a thought, and it would go, you're a piece of garbage. And it would like, I could see it floating there. And I'm like, that's not a great thought. Oh, that's a little negative. And there began this little bit of separation. And one of the most profound experiences of my life, and I remember this, because I remember this morning I was waking up, and as I was coming to consciousness, what was happening in my mind was I was beginning to say my prayer. Not beginning, I was in the middle of my prayers. And I did not do that. You know what I mean? I don't have control over the unconscious thoughts that are happening. But yet I took a course of action that I didn't like, that I didn't necessarily believe in when I started, and a change happened to me. And so when it talks about our will in our lives, I love the idea that my will is my actions, because I can direct that. And my life being the results of my actions, because the results aren't in my hands. We'll talk about that. So when it says make a decision to turn our will and our lives over to the care of God as we understood him, how does my will and my life get out of my hands and into the hands of a loving, caring higher power? Well, that is what steps 4 through 9 do. My will and my life is not turned over to God's care in step 3. My will and my life is turned over to God's care in 4 through 9, and the continuation of that in 10, 11, and 12. And I think that's helpful, because I don't know, I'm sure nobody here has ever gone through a breakup in sobriety and then vomited the emotional sort of like breakup feelings in meetings. I know you guys would never, but I've been there a time or, no, just a time, not a time or two, but I've been there. And then the old timers, they'd be like, Paige, you gotta let go and let God. And I'd say, yes. That's right. But because I didn't actually want to have a conversation, because I'm afraid they're going to ask me like a question that I don't know the answer to, you know, one like, how's it going? One of those real head scratchers. I can't do it. I would be like, yes. But internally, I'm like, how do you do that? So if you're wondering, if you have people that are telling you with well-meaning intent or because they're sick of hearing whining, which is rude, I would never. A little. But if you're getting let go, let God, and you're like, how do I do this? How I begin to let go and let God work in my life. The next step is typically inventory. That's what I'm deciding to do. Am I willing to take this course of action? The next step of which is write an inventory. And so that's how I let go and let God, through inventory or through the 10-step the 10-step process. But that's what I'm deciding to do. And so what I also want to talk about is the care of God. The reality is that the third step, and if I do well on time, probably won't, because it's me, but if I do well on time, I'll talk about how the third step is really the precipice. It is the edge. I'm standing on the edge of a cliff, and I don't know what's going to happen. And at the third step, I do not know if my will and my life will be cared for. I don't know. Is that going to happen for me? But here's the thing. If you want, you can look through this book. We have promises all over. We have third step promises. If I do well, if for time, which I won't, we'll definitely talk about them. We might not. And those don't happen at step 3, but we got promises in step 4. We have promises in step 5. We have promises in 8 and 9. We have promises in 11 and 10 and 12. We have promises all over this book. And anytime I see a promise as it is outlined in this book, that becomes evidence that my will and my life will be cared for. But deeper than that. You see, this book is a book of experience. It is a book of mirrors. And as we went through the first step, what we did was we held up the light of this book to the light of our experience. And did it match? Am I this person? Do I have this thing? And we get to do that here. And so when I go through the promises, and what's, again, I'm just going to spoil it. What's very rude is I got to take the action to get the results. You know, those 9th step promises. I've got to be at least halfway through my amends. Rude. I would like some results before I have to take action, but turns out that's not the order. And so, but every time I experience the promises and all over this book, the promises as they are outlined in this book, that becomes irrefutable evidence of God's care in my life. At the third step, I don't know if it's going to happen. And I'm holding out to, those 80 dudes in 1939 that wrote this, that published this thing, published in 39, those guys, and then everyone else who has since recovered as the result of this course of action. What I'm banking on is that they're not lying about their experience, that those promises are real. That's it. It's a leap of faith. It's a hope. It's a maybe. Could this be? But when that happens for me, when I experience it, I know beyond a shadow of a doubt my will and my life will be cared for. And then when it says God as we understood him, as some of you guys know, I'm a real hoot. Just so much fun. Just so much fun at parties. And that being said, I have a 1930s dictionary because I'm just fun. And so what I did was I looked up the word understand in my 1930s dictionary, and the definition of the word understand is to know through experience. So when we made a decision to turn our will and our lives over to the care of God as we understood him, at the third step, I'm not going to have an understanding of God. And often we feel like maybe it's more of a God of my misunderstanding, or if I could understand it, how could it be a power that is greater than me? But to understand is to know through experience. And at the third step, I'm not going to have that tangible experience of this power. But how I get that experience is these 12 steps. So at the third step, I'm deciding I'm going to embark upon the journey that will bring me to that understanding, that experience, that heart level knowing of this power. So we'll pop over to the top of page 58, how it works. Sometimes when I go to meetings, it's literally left side of the book if you got your book open. Sometimes when I go to meetings, people be like, we don't know how it works, as if it's some esoteric sort of thing. And I'm not saying it's not, but what I'm saying is, we actually do, and it's tucked away in a little chapter called How It Works. Wild. And if you're like, how does it work? Well, that's what's on 59. But what I want to do is just have a quick look at that first paragraph when it says, rarely have we seen a person fail who has thoroughly followed our path. We often read this first paragraph in the negative. I read it as spoilers, I'm constitutionally incapable. But what we can do is what I like to call, we can Missy Elliott this thing. If you guys are familiar with the rap artist Missy Elliott, in 2002, she released a song where I believe it was called Reverse It, where, you know, she says, you got a big book, let me search it. And she clearly means you got a big book. Let me search it for clear-cut directions on how I can recover from a seemingly hopeless state of mind and body. If you think it's anything else, that's weird. I'm just kidding. Don't gaslight you. But in that song, she sings these lyrics, and then it's reversed. You know, flip down, flip it, and reverse it, and then that's reversed. So when it says, rarely have we seen a person fail who has thoroughly followed our path, we get to reverse it. Often have we seen a person fail who has not done all 12 steps. The path that we have is laid out before us on page 59. That's the outline of what the path is. The path is these 12 steps. And then it says, those who do not recover are people who cannot or will not completely give themselves to this simple program. So let's flip down, flip it, and reverse it. And we got some Missy Elliott promises in step 5, but we'll get there when we get there. Flip down, flip it, and reverse it. So it is. Those who do recover are people who can and will completely give themselves to this simple program. What is the simple program? We see it on page 59. The 12 steps. All that is asked of me is to give myself to these 12 steps, to throw myself into this work as a way of life, like my life depends on it, because it does. And I'm not going to break down all of that paragraph just in respect of time. But what I want you to know is, if you are here today, you are not constitutionally incapable. And I mean that, and I believe that, and I don't have, I'm a little pedantic, but I'm not super de-duper pedantic. I will pedant a time or two, but there are not many hills that I will die on. This is the hill. I've got only a couple hills. This is the hill. I am dying on this hill. You can recover. You can get well. You can have a spiritual awakening that happens as the result of these 12 steps. Fight me. I'm on the hill. King of the hill. Turned real aggressive. I will simmer it down. But you can recover. When we talk about people who are constitutionally incapable, that is not you. That's not you. You're not constitutionally incapable. What does constitutional incapability look like, and what does it not look like? Constitutional incapability looks like, I don't have a problem. I don't need help. I'm good. Leave me alone. That is constitution, and with the glaring evidence that we do have a problem. What constitutional incapability is not relapsing. To relapse is a symptom of alcoholism. That is the obsession of the mind. And I got some news. The 12 steps of Alcoholics Anonymous are alcoholic proof. They are meant for alcoholics. So if you are relapsing, you are not constitutionally incapable. If you're afraid, you're not constitutionally incapable. If you're like, I don't want to, but I'm going to do it anyways, you're not constitutionally incapable. Constitutional incapability is that I don't have a problem, I'm not willing to do anything, and I'm not willing to be honest about the barriers that I have. That is constitutionally incapable, and you are not it. And that, a hill dying on. All right. Now, it goes on to talk about, in the next paragraph, this is the crux of what we're deciding in step 3. And when it talks about our stories disclose in a general way what we used to be like, what happened, and what we are like now. This is the question or the statement I get to turn into questions, and I get to ask myself. It says, if you've decided you want what we have, do I want what you have? Okay, well, what do we have in Alcoholics Anonymous? What is available? And what is available is permanent, contented recovery. Permanent, contented recovery. There's an asterisk because the permanency and the contentedness is contingent on the actions that I take on a daily basis. You know, there's always some fine print in this thing. But do I want that? And if I don't want it, that's okay. Nobody's going to make you. You know what I mean? You don't have to. If you're like, ew, no, thank you. Great, cool. No, you don't have to. But if I'm like, you know what, I do. You know what? I see the reality of my predicament. I'm willing. I'm willing to try something. I'm willing to go a different way. And then it says, and are willing to go to any length to get it? Am I willing to go to any length? Am I willing to go to any length to experience that spiritual awakening that is our solution? Am I willing to do that? And if you're like, well, what is your any lengths? Well, we can see page 59. Page 59 and the top of 60. Am I willing to do this as a way of life? Like my life depends on it, because it does. Because if I have alcoholism, it does. If I don't have alcoholism, yeah, maybe it's just like a hobby, To be fair, I'm a weirdo. I probably would write inventory as a hobby. Not when I got here, I wouldn't, because I'm like, oh, gross. But the more I do it, the more I see how incredible that process is. So now I would, but, So if I'm willing to say yes, then I'm willing to dive into this. Then you are ready to take certain steps. Those are the 12 steps. Now I want to pop us to the very top of page 59 when it says half measures availed us nothing, which I will point out is rude. It is rude. Half measures avail us, and I know we throw it around in meetings, half measures avail us nothing. But what does that mean? That means that not doing all of this, and I will drink again if I have alcoholism. That's what it's saying, which is rude, because I think I should at least get something for something. You know what I mean? I think if I do like half, I should at least get a quarter out of it. Maybe I don't get all of it, but you know what I mean? Just barter with me on this. And then it says, we stood at the turning point. And the third step is ultimately the turning point for our entire lives. And then it says we asked. And anytime in this book it says we asked, that's a prayer. Did you all know there was a prayer and how it works? A little sneaky prayer. Isn't that delightful? We ask this protection and care with complete abandon. And let me paint a picture for the third step dilemma, the third step situation that we find ourselves in. You see, if I have alcoholism, what it is like is I am in the forest and there is a monster with me. And that monster is the obsession of the mind. And I'm in this forest and I know I can't drink. I know I have to stay sober. And I see that there is that monster and I start running. And that monster, it always comes and it closes the distance. And the obsession of the mind takes a swipe, and it takes a swipe of me, and I take a drink and then I'm down. And I pull myself up and I'm like, I can't do that again. And I start running. And I'm ducking and diving, and I always mean to look up the dodgeball quote: duck, dive, whatever, duck and dodge, like all of those. Like I'm trying to dodge, I'm jumping over trees, I'm trying to avoid this monster, but it always closes the gap and it gets me. And every time it gets me, I get worn down and I pull myself up and I start running again. And I try different tactics. So I see that running isn't working. So I try hiding in caves, hiding hollowed out trees. And every single time it gets me and it gets me and it gets me again and again and again. And I'm hurting and I'm beat up and I'm trying everything that I can think to try, but it's not working. And I start running again. And by some miracle of miracles, I begin and I make it out to a clearing. And I run. And at the end of that clearing is the edge of a cliff. And I run to the edge of the cliff. And I look behind me and I see that monster of the obsession of the mind. And it is barreling down. And I see that I've got nothing that I can put between me and the first drink. There is nothing that is going to stop me. It's coming. It's only a matter of time. And I look over the edge of the cliff. And what do I see? I see this cloud of unknowing. And of course I did borrow that title from a medieval text, or from the title of a medieval text, because again, fun at parties. But you see, there's this cloud, and I can't see what's on the other side of that cloud, but I hear your voices. I hear your voices. Those of you who have recovered, those of you who have had a spiritual awakening, those of you who are saying, jump, we promise it's okay. Jump, we promise it's worth it. It's going to be okay. Jump. And because of the reality of my first step predicament and the hope that I have that y'all aren't lying in the second step, I make the decision to take a leap in step 3. That's what the third step is. I'm deciding that I'm going to take that leap of faith. But if I don't follow that decision up with action, I'm still on the edge of the cliff and the monster's coming. And so how do I leap? Well, I leap when I begin step 4, step 5, step 6, step 7. You get what I'm saying? I leap as I take that course of action. And here's what happens. I take the leap of faith, all 12 steps, and I find that every single time I am caught, every single time. And actually, I really don't have time for this bounce around, but we're bouncing. Let's pop over to page 100. Because if you're wondering, all right, well, what happens when I take this leap of faith? Well, let's bounce to page 100. And it's the first full paragraph. And it talks about both you and the new man must walk day by day in the path of spiritual progress. And that is another hill that I die on. As we're going to see on page 60, it's spiritual progress rather than spiritual perfection. Not progress, not perfection. Spiritual progress. How am I progressing spiritually? Because progressing and getting my family back, progressing and getting the job, the career, the money, the relationship, all of that is wonderful. Maybe not the relationship. Maybe you're making better choices than me, so fair enough. But all of that is wonderful. But it did not have the power to keep me sober. Spiritual progress is the name of the game. That's what we're talking about. So both you and the new man must walk day by day. A daily program of action in the path of spiritual progress. How am I growing spiritually? And I can ask myself this question today. How am I growing spiritually today? What does my spiritual growth look like today? And it says, if you persist, remarkable things will happen. And here's the tie-in. When we look back, we realize the things which came to us when we put ourselves in God's hands were better than anything we could have planned. So who catches me? I find that I land every single time safely and securely in the hands of a loving God. And it's fine if you're like, my God doesn't have hands. It is a metaphor. Your God doesn't have to have hands. But that's what I find every single time I am caught and I find myself in the loving hands of a power greater than myself. I'm trusting. I'm reading this at this moment. I'm trusting that. Okay, Paige probably doesn't have better things to do than lie about that. But Vivian doesn't. Vivian doesn't have better things to do, or Vivian definitely does have better things to do than lie about her experience. So we can trust Vivian and we can trust her experience, right? And so ultimately, that's what the third step is. I'm deciding that I'm going to take this leap of faith. I'm deciding that I'm going to take these 12 steps as a way of life. And as the result of that, my will and my life will be turned over to the care of a loving higher power. Now let's pop over to page 60. And because I spoke about spiritual progress rather than spiritual perfection, let's have a look at the 3 pertinent ideas. The first pertinent idea, those are the ABCs. For just those, page 60, having a visual, the ABCs. The first pertinent idea is that we are alcoholic and could not manage our own lives. And that is a step 1 idea. That is a step 1 concession, that I have this illness and I can't manage my life. And then it says that probably no human power could have relieved our alcoholism. And that is also a step 1 proposition. Because if a human power could have relieved my alcoholism, well, then I just do that. You know what I mean? I'd find relief in the relationship, or I'd find relief in the whatever. And then C, that God could and would if he were sought. That is step 2, that there is a power that can and will if I am willing to seek. And the third step is a decision to seek this power. How do I seek this power? How do I seek the spiritual awakening? The 12 steps. That's how I do it. And we know this to be true because it says being convinced that we were at step 3, which is that we decided. So we made this decision to turn our will and our life over to God as we understood him. Just what do we mean by that? And just what do we do? So how do I get to this place of decision? Well, it tells us the first requirement, the first thing that I need to be convinced of is that any life run on self-will can hardly be a success. And for a long time, I read that as any life, alcoholic, non-alcoholic, any human being trying to live on self-will, it's not going to work. And then a friend of mine, it was Bill S., because he's like, give me credit. And I always give him credit. Bill S., he spoke about any life does not just mean alcoholic, non-alcoholic. What are the different lives that I have? Well, we have, our AA life. We have a thought life. Didn't know I had that. I just thought I sucked. But I have a thought life. I have family life. Some of us have work life. Some of us have a work life, but no work-life balance. Just making jokes. You know what I mean? We have these different lives. And so what it's saying is that I can't have a little AA basket over here and be like, all right, you manage this. The little sobriety basket, because that's a little more eloquent than a bucket. But I do feel like sobriety buckets may be more apt. You take my sobriety bucket and let me manage all these other areas of my life. What it's saying is that I need to be convinced that all these areas of my life, with me trying to manage them, with me trying to run them, is not going to work. I need to let a different power work in my life because my power is not working. And it says on that basis, we are almost always in collision with something or somebody. Am I finding that I'm bumping up against other people, bumping up against life, that it's just not working for me? And then it says, even though our motives are good, I'm showing up with the best motives, and it's still not working. It's not working. I'm getting in conflict, or I'm avoiding conflict, and there's conflict within myself, and it's just life isn't working out. Is that my experience? And then it gets into this metaphor. Now, this part of the book, 60, 61, even down to 62, if you want, and just in respective time, because it's me, I don't have time to read it this way line by line. But a powerful thing is to put your name in it. And so how I would read it for me is the first requirement is that Paige be convinced that any of her lives run on self-will can hardly be a success. On that basis, Paige is almost always in collision with something or somebody, even though Paige's motives, usually good. Some of you are like, and reading it in that way. And then we get into this metaphor. And I'm just going to break down the metaphor rather than read it line by line. But the metaphor is the actor playing the director. So let's imagine that we are all in a play. And let's imagine that play is Romeo and Juliet. Now, some of you who did not skip out on your high school English are like, girl, that play, that didn't go very well. It ended in a murder-suicide, or not a double suicide, sorry. For those that were, skipping class in the smoke pit. Now, and to be fair, I do enjoy the drama. That's when I'm at the helm. Ooh, the drama. And so let's say that all of us are in this production of Romeo and Juliet. You know what I mean? And let's say I have been cast. Now, I know this is a shock to me as well as to you. I have not been cast as Juliet. Rude, what's up with that? Instead, I have been cast as tree number 3. And so I'm in my little tree costume. And imagine some of you might be Romeo or might be Juliet or might be some of the Montagues or the Capulets. And I'm in, if you're like, why are you moving like that? I'm in my little tree costume. And I'm shimmering over to you. And I'm like, hey, here's what you need to do. Here's what you need to say. Now, I don't have the full script. I just have the script that has my lines. And my lines are swaying the breeze. That's all I have. I don't know the full script, but I'm telling you what you need to do and what you need to say. And you're like, hey, Tree, you're not the boss of me. You know what I mean? You're not in charge. And then I start talking about what the music needs to be. And I always like making this joke. All right, what the accompaniment to this beautiful rendition of Romeo and Juliet needs to be? Alternative polka. So we're going to have an alternative polka backing track. And for some reason, some of you don't think that's a good idea. And I'm doing set design and there's a submarine for no reason. And you guys are like, hey, stop. Now, I'm trying to control it. And there are times I'm going to be nice and kind and self-sacrificing and show up with all these wonderful positive virtues. And there's other times tree number 3 is going to be a little cranky, not on her best tree-like behavior. You know what I'm saying? And I'm going to be mean or manipulative or have an outburst. But what happens is it confusion. The play doesn't come off. It doesn't work. And then you guys start getting resentful because you're like, you're not in charge. And I'm like, but I just know it would be so much better. Let me shimmy up to Romeo. You know what I mean? Like, I think I know how this thing's supposed to go. And then what happens is I feel hurt and rejected and not listened to. And life feels unfair, so I try to control more. And I'm telling you, listen, we gotta do like mid-90s blue eyeshadow for the makeup. And I'm telling you and you're like, girl, you don't know. And so what is the third step? Ultimately, the third step is I am going to trust. And if you've ever been on stage for any sort of school pageant, any sort of school play, I'm going to trust that right in the audience, there's a director. And if you've had the lights on you, you can't fully see into the audience. And that director has the full script. That director knows the lighting cues, knows that my makeup choices maybe aren't the best. Alternative polka, it's not going to be that weird. Weird of you to pick that music. But knows the lighting, the music, the sets, knows all of it and how it's supposed to be. And what I'm going to do is I am going to let the director be the director. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to follow my lines. And in a very literal sense, what does that mean? Well, the very next line that I have in a very literal sense is I'm going to put pen to paper and I'm going to start writing on my inventory. That is the next line. That's then followed by, working on fears, working on sex conduct, then, doing a 5th step and so on. Those are my lines. Now, but if you remember back in the metaphor, what was my lines? My lines were sway in the breeze, right? And what a beautiful metaphor that I stumbled across on accident, because, a lot of times in the second step, we talk about, I can't believe in something that I can't see, but I can't see the wind. I see the results of the wind. I see the wind move through things and impact things. And just as tree number 3, I'm just going to let that wind blow through me, sway in the breeze. And what a beautiful metaphor, because what am I deciding in the third step? I'm going to take the course of action that is going to allow this power to work and flow through me. That's what I'm going to do. And I'm going to let the director be the director. And I also want you to know, the director was already being the director and already trying to direct. It's like I'm acting from this place of, all right, I will allow the director to direct, as if that's not your job. Get out of the chair, And I have this other metaphor. And this other metaphor is and it works really well if you either were kids during an era which you had video games, or you raised kids during an era with video games. And with the video games, this works when you got one sibling that is significantly older than the younger sibling. Because what will happen is the older sibling will be given a video game console, and they would start playing their video games. And what does the younger sibling want to do? They want a turn. And some of you are like getting flashbacks to childhood. I'm so sorry for the younger siblings. But what does the older sibling do? The older sibling gives the younger child, a controller that is not plugged in. And when I am trying to play God, what I am operating with is a controller that's not plugged in. And you see, I'm pushing the buttons and I'm doing things, but it's not quite responding as it should. It's not quite working as it should. And so what I'm going to do is, again, let the director be the director. Now let's pop over to page 62. Page 62, first full paragraph. When it says selfishness, self-centeredness, that we think is the root of our troubles. And what? I have been bamboozled. You know what I mean? There's a lot of bamboozling that happens in Alcoholics Anonymous, because I come to Alcoholics Anonymous and I'm like, what? Again, the old timers were like, what is your problem? And I would be like, oh, you asking me questions, yikes. But if I were able to try to be honest, well, actually, when I first got here, I'm like, the boyfriend, he's the problem. If he could get sober, I'd get my stuff together. The lie detector proved that was a lie, that wasn't accurate. But I would have got to that place where I would have told you alcohol was my problem. But then in step 1, I have that concession, because every time I took that first drink, I was sober. So what is my problem? My problem is the obsession of the mind, the sober thought that I have that takes me back to the first drink. And then in step 2, we begin to take this deep dive into what is known as the spiritual malady. And we see that on page 52 on the bedevilments. And it describes how I feel sober. And to be fair, it is a part of the human condition, but it describes that sober state. That feeling of uselessness, that prey to misery and depression, can't make a living, feeling of uselessness, like that sort of place where I'm miserable and I am unhappy in my own skin. And I see that I need to find a relief for that. And then I come to here and you're telling me, wait a minute, selfishness, self-centeredness, that's the root of my troubles? Wait. I'm being bamboozled again. What's happening? And so how this works. And actually, I'll give us a definition. How I look at the word selfish. Selfish is how I behave and act in the world. And self-centered is how I think and perceive. So I will give you an example. Selfish is how I act. So when I steal your car, sleep with your husband, and pee on your carpet, that is selfish. When I'm worried you don't like me because I did all those things, that is self-centered. And if you're wondering, I would never, it was linoleum. That's one of my page jokes. And so that's the difference. But so selfishness, self-centeredness, that we think is the root of our troubles. That, like when we think of the roots in a plant-based metaphor, that is what is feeding the plant. That is what is feeding my illness. How could that be? So what happens is that root at base is an alcoholic. Well, and as a human being, many human beings, but definitely alcoholics, have what is known as that spiritual malady. That I can't fit and be okay in my own skin. We're not the only ones that have it. That's why we look at the obsession and the allergy when we diagnose alcoholism. But what we treat in Alcoholics Anonymous is the spiritual malady. And what happens is it is so painful for an alcoholic to be sober, and we find such profound relief in alcohol that our brain gets warped into this obsession of the mind that tells me it'll be different. Nobody will ever know. The obsession of the mind. And you see that emptiness and that loneliness and that pain that I feel at the depths of my soul when I am sober. That, and I didn't know it, and I wasn't going to be jazzed about it when I got here, but that is a conscious sense of separateness from God. It is a sense of separateness. It is a conscious apartness. And I can hold that, if you're like, I don't know if that's true, well, hold that up to the light of your experience. Did I feel empty, alone? Did I feel like an alien? Did I feel like I didn't fit in wherever I went? This feeling of conscious apartness, this sense of separateness. And what that is painful. And that pain, if you've ever been in physical, who hasn't? But whether it's a stub in your toe or a chronic illness, that pain, when I am in pain, I act from that pain. So imagine, your shoulder's hurting you. You're gonna favor your shoulder. You're gonna act from that pain. And that self-centeredness is I'm thinking about that pain. The focus is on that pain. But in this instance, what happens is that selfishness and self-centeredness, how I act from that pain and how I perceive and see around that pain and that focus on that pain, that creates more and more perceived blockages between me and this power. And I'm blocked. And what I need to do is get unblocked. Spoilers, how do we get unblocked? 4 through 9. That is the spiritual plumber work that we're going to do to clear it away. 4 through 9, and 10 and 11 and 12 continue to keep that channel clear. And so that's what that means, and that's what we're talking about. And then it says, driven by 100 forms of fear, self-delusion, self-seeking, and self-pity. And that's what's driving me. Now, I'm not going to ask anyone to do a show of hands, but a lot of times, in the rooms we talk about, I took my will back, or I started driving the bus again, and we say that. Now, I'm not saying you didn't, but yeah, I'm saying you didn't. Because here's the thing. I think I took my will back and I started driving this bus. And yeah. I know I took the bus, a little off the rails a bit as it pertained to my alcoholism. But I can manage all other areas of my life. It's fine. Well, who's driving? I'm not driving. Who's driving? It is 100 forms of fear, self-delusion, self-seeking, and self-pity. That is who is at the wheel. There is a madman at the wheel. You know what I mean? An absolute, 100 forms of fear. That's what's running my life. Delusion, self-seeking, self-delusion, self-seeking, self-pity. That is what is running my life. I didn't take my will back. That's where the will is, in the hands of my little brain gremlins, That's who's running it. And then it says, we step on the toes of our fellows and they retaliate. And I notice their retaliation, but I don't see that I stepped first. And it says, sometimes they hurt us seemingly without provocation. I was innocently driving my bus through a shopping mall, and then people got upset at me. How unfair and unfortunate, you know what I mean? But it says, but we invariably find that at some time in the past, we've made decisions based on self, which later put us in a position to be hurt. And we're going to come back to that when we get to resentment. So next week, we're going to focus on step 4. We're going to focus on resentments, and we'll probably go maybe not one whole step at a time, but take each section of resentments one section at a time. But we're going to come back to that, because that's what we want to see. Where did I step first? Where did I make a decision based on self that put me in a position to have this resentment in the first place? And then what we look at is that, and I'll point out, it's very rude. So our troubles, we think, are basically of our own making. Rude. They arise out of ourselves. What? And the alcoholic is an extreme example of self-will run riot. That can't be right, though he usually doesn't think so. Also, if you're looking to start a band, I'm just going to throw it out there. Welcome to the stage, self-will run riot. Woo! You don't have to do that. But if you want, that one's free. And so what we're talking about in that paragraph is that what I need more than anything else is to be free of self. That's self. And that is not it is that egoic self, the false self, the fear, the resentments, the guilt, the shame, the self-pity, all the defects. That's what I need to be free of. I have to, because if I stay blocked, the obsession of the mind will return, and I will drink again. And I can't overcome self with self. I can't try to use a crowbar of self to relieve me of self. It's like bone on bone, self on self. It doesn't work. So I need to see that, I need to be free of this. Yes, that's what I need to do. And when we see that God can do that for me, if I'm willing to take this course of action, that's what we're deciding. Now, at the bottom of page 62, it says, bottom paragraph, it says, this is the how and why of it. First of all, we had to quit playing God. It didn't work. So this is our spiritual pink slip. We are fired. Absolutely fired. And if responsees, I'll make them a little pink slip because I'm fun. Again, that is subjective, because you're like, oh, you give them paperwork? Because it is a little fun. And on my little pink slips, it says reason for termination of employment. It says gross incompetence. See step 1 for further amplification. Because in step 1, I admitted my life was unmanageable. Y'all know who was managing my life? Me. I managed my life into an unmanageable position. If my life was a blockbuster, man, that blockbuster is in embers. You know what I mean? No, of course I should be fired. And then it says, next we decided that hereafter in this drama of life, God was going to be our director. And it gives us these different ways in which we can orientate ourselves to this power. And I've got 4 minutes left, so we're not going to break them all down. But what it's saying is like, okay, I am no longer running my life. And I'm going to trust that, and to be fair, anything could do a better job of running my life than me. You know how I know? Because I was running it into like dying, into like drinking myself to death, suicide attempts, not even ideation. I am not, listen, like, I'm sure a tennis ball would have done a better job. Now, I'm not going to turn my life over to the care of a tennis ball or a doorknob, but I will turn it over to a power that is loving and caring. And I know that based on the evidence of the promises throughout this book. Then on page 63, it talks about when we sincerely took such a position. So this power is going to run my life, and I'm going to work for this power. It says all sorts of remarkable things followed. We had a new employer. Being all powerful, he provided what we needed if we kept close to him and performed his work well. So what that is, I describe that as the employment contract, because nothing makes spirituality more fun and enticing than making it bureaucratic. Just a real hoot over here. So it's like signing an employment contract. And when you sign an employment contract, to be fair, I don't think I've ever I think I've only had one job where I had to sign an employment contract, which tells you the type of employment I've had. But in it, it will tell you what you get paid. It will tell you, your wages, your hourly, whether it's salary. It'll tell you your benefits. We have dental and eyeglass coverage, which that's how you know I'm getting older, because I'm like, ooh, what about the dental coverage? Tell me about that. If you get work from home, if you get like flexible hours, what are your vacation? I don't know what the equivalent of a 401k is in Canada, but like a 401k, that sort of stuff. TFSA, I don't know. It's a lot of acronyms and I don't got them. But all that. And so that's what it's saying, is he provides what we needed. So everything I need is provided for me. But what do I have to do? If we kept close to him and performed his work well, how do I keep close to this power? I keep close to this power by these 12 steps as outlined in this book. By these 12 steps as a way of life. And when it says, and performed his work well, what is his work for somebody like me? And I always describe it as love and service. To show up to everything that I do in the spirit of love and service. But also very specifically, like everywhere, but also specifically with God's little drunks. Because I'm a little drunk, and I was made specifically to help God's little drunks. And so that's all that is asked of me. If I am willing to do this, to take this course of action, I will get these results. And then when it talks about established on such a footing, what follows is the third step promises. They don't happen at step 3. But they happen as I am willing to take this course of action. They happen as I am willing to, and I don't have time to show it, but a dear friend of mine made a little graph where you can compare and contrast these third step promises with the ninth step promises. These promises do come true. Actually, you know what? I might go a little over, but so it says established on such a footing. And the footing is these 12 steps as a way of life. We became less and less interested in ourselves, less and less wrapped up in the bondage of self, the pain of me on me, bone on bone, selfishness, self-centeredness, free from that. Our little plans and designs, you know why? Because they didn't work. Tree number 3 is not the director, and it wasn't going well, and I was starting to lose my leaves because of stress, And it goes on. More and more, we became interested in seeing what we could contribute to life. And that is a change that happens to me. But the more that I focus on what I can give, the more that I receive in abundance. And that is my lived experience. And it says, as we felt new power flow in, see, I'm clearing away that channel, that power is flowing, and I was powerless. I need power. As we enjoyed peace of mind, the gremlins between the ears, they start singing a different tune. As we discovered we could face life successfully. You know what facing life successfully looks like for me? Not wanting to frickin' die. That's what that looks like. You know what I mean? And that's a big deal for me. As we became conscious, that conscious is that with knowing, that experiential knowing of his presence, God not being an over there idea, but a lived experience in the here and now. As we discovered we could face life successfully, as we became conscious of his presence, we began to lose our fear of today, tomorrow, the hereafter. We were reborn. That fear falls from us. And to be reborn, something needs to die. What is dying? That selfishness, self-centeredness, 100 forms of fear, self-delusion, self-seeking, and self-pity. That is what is dying. And then what we have is the third step prayer. It says, God, I offer myself to thee. So God, I'm giving myself to you to build with me and do with me as thou wilt. Do with me whatever you think is right, because I don't know. I don't know anymore. And it says, relieve me of the bondage of self that I may better do thy will. Take away from me the fear, self-delusion, self-seeking, the selfishness of self-centeredness. Take away that pain so that I can do and be who you would have me be. And it says, take away my difficulties, not because they're difficult, but take away my difficulties, that victory over them may bear witness to those I would help of capital C, capital P, capital T, capital L, capital T, capital W, thy power, thy love, and thy way of life. Take away my difficulties so that I can help others. I can help others who have hurt and who have struggled the same way that I have hurt. And it says, may I do thy will always. And ultimately, we don't have to use that prayer if you don't like that prayer. You get to use your own wordings, but that for me is the signing of the employment contract. The decision, all right, I'm going to take that leap of faith. I'm willing to jump off that cliff. And I know that I've made that decision when I'm writing inventory, when I've begun to take action. The thrust of what the third step prayer is God, higher power, creator, spirit of the universe. I'm willing to try a different way of life. And I'm scared of these 12 steps, and I don't know how it's going to go. I need your help, but I'm willing to give it my best go. That's the thrust of what we're trying to do in the third step. So the third step, very simply, it is a decision to live these 12 steps as a way of life, like our life depends on it, because it does. And I'm a little over, so I'll stop it there and turn it over to Vivian.